the structure is going to be what shows how the whole book is put together. And Daniel chapter 4 is also included, although it isn't included in the structure chart in the Daniel book. And I'll explain that a little bit later. So we're all ready to go.
Yeah, why don't you share with us how you discovered the structure pattern in Daniel?
Okay. When I was working with a very, very wonderful lady, her name was Marion Berry. She's passed away now, but she had broken open the structure of Revelation, and she taught this all over the world. I understood that structure in Revelation, but I was working with Daniel. She hadn't really done a lot of work in the book of Daniel, mostly just Daniel chapter 12, not chapters 1 to 12. But as I was working in the Daniel, as we were starting out, I was thinking, I wonder if Daniel has a similar structure as John does in Revelation. I just sort of had a feeling that being a prophet, maybe he would have. Now, in the very back of the Daniel book, I think it's pages 399 and 400, you'll see the Revelation structure chart the way I understood it then. Okay, if I was to redo it, it would not really change much. It would just get tweaked a little bit. But what I tried to do is go through the 4 visions of Daniel and see if I could find that structure of, you know, a heavenly scene and then the outline, etc., etc. Well, it wasn't quite the same in Daniel. But the way that you've already seen the structure in Daniel chapter 2, the way he set it up, we went and we looked, my husband and I, we went and looked in every vision to see if we could figure out if every single vision did this. Now, the difference was that Daniel has that interlude question that follows the heavenly scene. And you've all noticed that already. And after he gets the prophetic outline, where is given the interpretation of what the symbolic heavenly scene was, then he always had a question. The answer. That's where he got the answer to his question, and then it was the end time event. Well, John doesn't do that. He doesn't have a question and then an answer to the question. He just does the 4 components. So when we realized that there was this questioning going on with Daniel, you know, and there seemed to be an answer, then Richard and I went and checked all of the visions to see if Daniel had a question after the heavenly scene, and if he always got the answer after the prophetic outline. Because I thought, if he does, then that's going to make up his structure. And sure enough, it happened. I was absolutely shocked. You know, it's just amazing what you find if you go looking, right?
Right.
But I didn't realize until after the book was printed, unfortunately, that Daniel chapter 4 does the same thing. It follows that exact same structure. Now that's interesting because Daniel 2, 7, 8, and then 10, 11, and 12, those 4 visions, okay, those are visions that Daniel has around the prophecies of what's going to happen with the kingdoms starting from his time frame right down to the end of time. It's a prophecy of what we can expect to find so that we know how close we're getting to the end of time. But Daniel chapter 4, although it's a vision, it's not a vision of what's going to happen from then till the end of time. It's a vision just of King Nebuchadnezzar and what's going to happen to him if he doesn't do such and such and so and so. Something's going to happen to him. So it's a different vision. But the structure is really interesting. It's fascinating. And just 1 or 2 more comments. The reason that Daniel chapter 4 is going to be the most important chapter of the whole book when it comes to understanding how to work with timelines. And timelines are lots of fun, and everybody wants to know how to work with them because they tell us where we are in the stream of time. But chapter 4 is the one that tells us how to work with these timelines. It's the very first chapter or very first vision, either way, in the whole book of Daniel that has timelines, but it is the structure in Daniel chapter 4 that's going to tell you exactly how to work with a timeline. And I didn't quite realize that. So it's really fun. It's not hard, but it might be a little bit of a foreign term, a foreign concept. But I think if you learn it right here, you'll have a lot more fun when you get into Daniel 7 and 8. And Daniel 9 has tons and tons of timelines. And then there's timelines in Daniel 12. So you want to know how to work with them. So maybe that helps a little bit, Libby. And I don't know if there's any questions right up front, maybe if people are confused right now. I'd be happy to take them, or it's up to you.
Oh, I think that was a great introduction. And Christine does have a question, Charlene, before we get started.
Charlene, what do you mean by when you use the term structure? Can you expand?
Well, we're going to, yes. So it's just like if you're going to build a house, you need a blueprint, right? Mm-hmm. And when you work with that blueprint, if you don't do everything exactly the way that blueprint shows, then you might have your heating and your plumbing and your sewers and your electrical in the wrong places. And at which time your building inspector is not going to pass your house, right? So when I'm talking about structure, and we'll have some kind of fun things to look at, it's the way that things are put together in a certain order. Let's just use a recipe, baking a cake. Usually you don't put the flour in first, usually it's the sugar and the eggs and the shortening that goes in first, right? It's the order that you do things in. So Christine, I wasn't here the last 3 weeks, so I don't know if you were here or not, but can you just tell me, were you here for the Daniel 2 presentation when Libby walked everybody through that?
I think I was not. I think I missed that one.
Okay, so are you familiar with the structure chart that was given in chapter 2 at the end there on page 47? Do you remember what it looked like?
A little bit, yes.
Okay, so it had those 4 components. So those 4 components are part of this structure. Every single vision starts with the heavenly scene. You never have a vision that has the heavenly scene in position number 2, 3, or 4. So it's the order of the way things go together. Okay. So tonight, right now, Libby's going to show you how this works. So I think your question's good, but I think it's going to get answered as she goes through the next couple slides.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay.
And actually, Christine, that was a perfect question, because that shows how important it is for us to understand what the Daniel structure is. And if we don't take this time tonight to look into it and answer those questions, and if we just dive on in and keep on rolling and don't take time to understand this structure, we're going to miss so much. So that's why we're going to look at this presentation tonight that Charlene has shared with us. And
thank you, Charlene, for articulating that, just putting it into words, and that helps. Thank you.
Absolutely. So what is a structure is the question, and it's defined as the act of building, the manner of building, and the manner of organization based on Webster's 1828 dictionary. This structure is the key to fully understand historical and end-time prophetic books like Daniel and Revelation. So it's going to give us some great insights on how to organize our study and stay on track in an orderly manner. Daniel 12:10, none of the wicked shall understand, but the wise shall understand. So in this example, do you see structure? And the answer is absolutely not. You see the shower head not recessed into the wall. You see pipes everywhere. You see vents. You see the faucet coming out of the wall. You see the plumbing exposed. You see the cabinet falling off the wall. And so this is someone that did not follow a blueprint, and it turns out to be a mess. And so we've all seen those shows on HGTV and DIY Network on how these construction people come in and they don't follow the right building manner and organization. They don't follow the blueprints, and it turns out to be a mess. So now in this picture, you do see that someone did follow the blueprint, and it's tidy and it's pleasant and it's all in order. There's no confusion. Everything is in its place.
Thus making it functionable.
Absolutely. And the same applies to the book of Daniel. And so this introduction is the first part of structural pattern. Daniel's structure is number 1, simple. Number 2, perfect. Number 3, uniquely different from Revelation, as Charlene was sharing. So this is extremely interesting to all of us, because before this, I didn't even know that Daniel had a particular structure, a particular pattern of a structure. So not only is it just the structure shown once, but multiple times, as Charlene was sharing with us. And then, as she also shared, after she completed her book, then lo and behold, she saw another structure in chapter 4. So it's just amazing. His word is so amazing, and it's so exciting to see how we make these discoveries. So structural patterns in Daniel. We're going to look at several, okay? Because there's going to be vision components that have a structural pattern. There's going to be verse sequencing that has a structural pattern. There's going to be kingdom alignment that has a structural pattern, and time frame movements. So there's not only structural patterns, there's patterns within the structural patterns. So it's always in a forward progressive movement. So in vision 1,
and Libby, if I can just,
yes,
Libby, if I can just interrupt here just a little bit, that forward progressive movement is probably the most important thing that you'll ever remember with this. And I don't want you to ever forget it, because it really comes forward a lot, especially in calendar teachings. We need to always be looking for a forward progressive movement, not things that go backwards, and not things that go forward and then back and then forward and then back. It's always in a forward movement. So this forward progressive movement is going to be a key phrase that's going to come up a lot. You'll see it on the slides tonight.
Okay, very good. So this is the structural chart that Charlene had mentioned to Christine about Daniel chapter 2. And this is the vision components. So here, as mentioned earlier, it starts with a heavenly scene. And in Daniel chapter 2, that was in verse 1 and 19, and his dream was of a statue with a gold head, silver breast and arms, a brass belly and thigh, and iron legs, and iron and clay feet and toes. That was the heavenly scene that he saw. And following such a dream would logically follow with a question, wouldn't it? Like, what is the secret of this dream? How many times have we awakened after a dream and wondered, what did that mean? So that's the interlude question that follows the heavenly scene, not only in this first vision, but we're going to see it repeated in vision 2, vision 3, and vision 4. So after the question, you see the historic prophetic outline. In Daniel 2, it occurs in verses 36 through 43, because there is an interpretation of that dream. So we have more information on what that heavenly scene was about. So we see that the interpretation is revealed through Daniel, that the gold was Babylon, the silver was Medo-Persia, the bronze Greece, and the iron Rome. And then following on the last quadrant is two components. We get the answer to the question. In this particular chapter was verse 44, and then the end time event is revealed in verse 45 of chapter 2 in this first structure of Daniel. Any other comments on that, Charlene? Okay. So those are the vision components. And these are the building blocks of Daniel's structure. So Daniel's structure, the first pattern, how the vision components work together, because as I shared, it's not only in vision 1, but it's in vision 2 and vision 3 and vision 4. And not only that, as Charlene shared, we're going to see this same pattern in chapter 4. So you have the heavenly scene. It goes across the board. This is the structure of all these chapters. Who knew? None of us until we started studying this book. So that's the heavenly scene. The visions and dreams begin with a heavenly scene. Then it follows in all of these visions the interlude question. As I said, if you see such a vision or have such a dream, the first thing you ask is, I wonder what that meant. So that's the interlude question. What is the secret of the dream? That's always followed by the historic prophetic outline, where the interpretation is given to the heavenly scene. The fourth component of the structure of Daniel, the visions, is two components. The answer to the question as listed as 4A, and the end time event as listed as 4B. So you see the pattern, you see the structure, you see the sequence, vertically and laterally. Very, very structured. That's amazing, amazing discovery there. Patterns and sequencing, Charlene, did you want to review this section here?
Yes, I will. This is just about 3 slides. And I meant to mention this earlier, but this is the best place to do it right now. Anyway, when I was working on Daniel, we happened to be in Prince George, 6 hours away. We were at Richard's sister's house, and it was a school night. And she was doing homework with, I think Alexis was in 3rd grade at that point in time. And all of a sudden, I heard from the kitchen, I can't stand this anymore. This is ridiculous. And I said, what's the matter? Well, she said, this homework is just terrible. They've been having it since kindergarten, and I'm sick of this. Well, so I went over to look at what this homework was, and it was a page of what they call patterns and sequencing. And they teach these concepts up here in Canada from kindergarten to about the 4th grade. And I don't remember doing it in grade school, but maybe they do it down there in the States too. But it was just really simple. And just as an example, there would be a chestnut, a tree, and a squirrel. And then there would be maybe a hammer. And what the child was asked to do was to circle the items, the pictures that went together in a sequence. Well, everybody knows a hammer has nothing to do with a tree, a chestnut, and a squirrel. So they were to pick out these patterns. And when I saw this, you know, the work page, I thought, oh my goodness, that's exactly what Daniel is doing. He's got this pattern in his book. It's Babylon, Media, Persia, Greece, and Rome. And if there's anything else, it gets chucked out. And I just went, I couldn't believe it. It was from just a homework page of a grade 3 scribbler. So we're just going to look at just a simple example of how this would work if you were doing a grade 3 project. Libby, do you want to teach it or shall I? Let's go with it.
I'd like you to teach it, but I did see Momo have her hand up. Did you want to ask a quick question first?
Yeah, I had a quick question. I was gonna ask what page were we on? I'm a little lost on where we are.
We're doing a special set apart presentation on just the structure right now. So we're not on any particular page right now.
Oh, okay. Oh,
Okay.
okay. Thank you. I'm sorry.
No worries. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Charlene.
Okay, so this is just a little example of what you might have, you know, in kindergarten to grade 3, where the teacher gets up and tells the students that she's going to teach them about patterns and sequencing. And of course, these are great big words for grade school children. But this is what she says. This is the pattern of fruits. It's an apple, an orange, and a banana. That is the pattern. It's not banana, orange, apple. It's apple, orange, banana. So she said, that's the pattern, and I want you to give me the same pattern in all 5 columns. But she says, I'm going to add a new fruit in column number 2. So what does she do, Libby? She gives us column number 2. And there is another fruit. It's a pear. Now the teacher says, I want you to repeat this pattern 3 more times, and I want you to add the last fruit again until you have 7 fruits. Okay? So, Sharon, what do you think the child should be doing? If you want, and I want 7 fruits by the time you get to column 5. But here's the sequence now. You add the last fruit every single time. So what should we find in column 3, Sharon? We have, what's the pattern or the sequence?
Apple, orange, banana, pear, pear.
Right, let's go see. Okay, so that's the pattern in the sequencing, and you can see exactly what's happening there. Okay, so what were the teacher's instructions? We need to have 7 fruits, and we only have 5. Okay, Carol Ann, you're the next one. What should we find in column number 4?
We should find apple, orange, banana, pear, pear, pear.
Let's see if she's right. You get a red check mark. Okay,
Yeah.
Betty, there's one more. Betty Schultz, there's one more. If you're following the teacher's instructions and you want to get a gold star, how are you going to arrange these fruits? So you have 7 of them.
I want a gold star, so I'm going to say apple, orange, banana, pear, 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 pear.
Okay. There you go.
I get a pear.
Isn't that easy? That's easy, isn't it? That is how easy Daniel's structure is. It's just like that. So I think we've got one more slide, don't we, Libby?
Oh, yes.
Oh, okay. Well, here is your pattern and your sequencing. You're always adding an extra pear, and now we've got 7 fruits. Well, Daniel's going to do the same thing, okay? So here we've got our image. That is the beginning. The very first vision in Daniel chapter 2 is the vision for all of Daniel and all of Revelation. But it's written in a very, very simple manner. There's no timelines. It's written very simply. It's just basic. So, Sharon, can you tell me what the pattern is? What do you see as the beginning pattern?
Babylon, Media, Persia, Greece, Rome, and Rome.
There you go. So the pattern is Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. Okay, but Daniel actually talks about 7 kingdoms. There are only 4, but one of these kingdoms is going to do something else. Remember what we have to do? We have to repeat the last kingdom again because we need to get to 7. Okay, Carol Ann, can you help us with number 2? And this would be
Yes.
happening in Daniel chapter 7. What should it be?
Okay, it should be Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, Rome. Correct?
Let's check it out. She's right. Okay, that's what you're going to find in Daniel chapter 7. Okay. All right, who did I ask next? Somebody pop in and give me, what would Daniel 8, the 3rd vision, what should we find in Daniel 8, the 3rd vision for the pattern and the sequence? Betty, do you want to go next and we'll have somebody new for the last one?
I'll give it a shot. How about if we go, oh, I haven't got my glasses on. I should have it memorized. Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greek, Rome, Rome, Rome.
Let's check her out, everybody.
Yay!
That's right. There's a 3rd component of Rome. Okay, so there's only one more vision, the 4th vision. Its vision includes chapters 10 to 12, all right? There's one more pattern in sequencing that we have to remember. Who wants to go? And you all know what it is. I know you know, because it's so easy. Who wants to do it?
I'll do it. Mary.
Okay, Mary.
Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, 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 Rome.
That's right. You know what? It's so easy, isn't it?
Yeah.
So listen, this is why Daniel's doing it this way. There's only 4 kingdoms. But the 4th kingdom is going to be divided into 3 different sections of Rome. It will be Imperial Rome. Actually, it's going to be 4, won't it? It will be Imperial Rome will be the first one. The second one is Little Horn Rome, Papal Rome. In Vision 3, it will be the King of Fierce Countenance Rome. And in Vision 4, it will be King of the North Rome. So Rome is getting a lot of attention in Daniel's visions. When you look at it, when your eye looks at this, what do you see the most of? Do you see more of Babylon or more of Rome?
Rome.
Yes.
The light
Rome is, yes. What Daniel's trying to do with this structure is to point your eye and say, you need to watch what's going on with Rome, okay? But remember, Rome is talked of as Babylon. They have a lot of the same characteristics, right? But he's trying to get your attention right here that there's going to be a lot of emphasis on the kingdoms of Rome. Now, why are we doing this? Because when you get into Revelation 13, there is a conglomerate beast that comes out of the sea, and it has 7 heads. Daniel's only talking about 4 kingdoms, like you see in that first vision. 4 kingdoms of Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. But in Revelation 13, there are 7 heads. Well, the reason that there's 7 is because there's 4 of these heads are going to represent kingdoms of Rome in one form or another. So that's kind of just an overview of what's happening with the structure. Is there any questions about that?
No, it seems like that's pretty
No.
clear. I'm sorry, was there a question?
Yeah. What was the 4th Rome? I missed it.
The 4th one is actually going to be called King of the North, and you will find this in Daniel chapter 11. But as you get to study Daniel chapter 11, you'll find out that there's King of the North and King of the South all the way through about 45 verses. And there's lots of he's and hims and theys and thous, lots of pronouns. But this king of the north and the king of the south is kind of the main theme. When you get to the end part of the fourth vision, where you're discovering what that final Roman kingdom is, it is actually a king of the north. It's the latter or the last king of the north, because there's many of them, but it's the last king of the north. But you have a ways to go. You have some other things to learn first.
That's great.
Okay.
And this has given us a little sneak peek overview, so that's exciting too.
Mhm.
Okay, the Daniel's second pattern of Daniel's structure is verse sequencing, and this is pretty simple. We have in Vision 1, Daniel chapter 2, the verse sequencing is verse 1 and verse 19. And then 26 reveals the interlude question. And then historic prophetic outline, we see 36 through 43. And you see it's all staying in order. And the answer to the question is revealed in verse 44. And finally, the end time event verse is verse 45. So there you have the verse sequencing of Vision 1, Daniel 2. So just for fun, would someone like to say the verse sequencing of Vision 2 in Daniel 7? Yeah.
I've got it, Libby, if you
Okay.
like.
Yeah.
It would be Daniel 7, 2 through 14.
Mhm.
Then the interlude is Daniel 7, verse 16. The prophetic outline is Daniel 7, 17 through 25. And the answer to the question, Daniel 7, 26. And the end event is Daniel 7, 27. I think it's
Right.
because it was so terribly small. I had to get
Yeah,
my
it
nose
is
out
very
here.
small. Yeah, and so we see in all four of these visions, the sequences of the verses are in order, and they're recorded there as well. So that's the verse sequencing in Daniel's structure. Again, as Charlene has emphasized, the forward progressive movement.
Mhm. And what I would like to say, Libby, as well, is this might sound like it's just way too simple. And it is simple, but the reason that I'm emphasizing the verse sequencing is because there's many, many people that when they get to chapter 11, and trying to put those 45 verses, figure out who is who and what is what, and who's coming from the north now and who came from the south next. There's a lot of expositors that will move these verses around. They will put verse 15 before verse 12. And I've seen this happen a lot of times. Nobody has permission to do that. When Daniel starts out in verse 1, he's going to have that forward progressive movement out through those kingdoms, all the way through those 45 verses. So what happens in chapter 11 is that you can find the secular historical events, but there could be 2 or 3 historical events that will match the same verse, but they're in different time frames. That's where it gets tricky. So you have to choose the history that works with the prophetic scripture that keeps the order not only in verses, but in the time frame of the dates, so that your date of like 606 BC wouldn't come before like 498 or something like that. Everything has to stay in order. So this might look really simple here, but it can get very complicated in chapter 11 on your fourth vision, okay? So while it looks simple here, and you might think, why do we need to know this? That's the reason, because chapter 11 is going to be a challenging chapter if you don't understand. All the verses have to stay in order with all the dates, okay?
Okay, very good. Thank you. And the kingdom alignments, this slide just shows, like when we started in our introduction, how the scepter was first given to Adam, and then the fall with Adam and Eve, it was transferred to Satan and then on to Nimrod. And then we've studied how it transferred to Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, pagan Rome, Little Horn Rome, and to Kingdom 6, the king of fierce countenance, and which was Rome, and 7th, the king of the north, Rome. And then that last part covers the epilogue event. And there was a good, I had it marked, but I don't think I have it anymore. But let me see if I can find it real quickly. Shouldn't take me very long. It was just something I wanted to read to y'all about the epilogue from page 368. The epilogue is the most important part of Daniel's book and presents a general question of how long shall it be to the end of these wonders? The answer follows in 3 timelines that throw a floodlight on events that will transpire right up to the very eve of the second coming of Yahusha. We're looking forward to that. In Daniel's epilogue, Yahusha is the main character. Yahushua HaMashiach gives a detailed explanation of how he will finish the work and overcome all the earthly persecutors of his people. This theme is carried forward and elaborated upon in Revelation. Okay. So Daniel's structure, the third pattern we're going to look at within Daniel's structure involves kingdom alignment. So there were 4 kingdoms in Daniel 2. We just reviewed those. Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. And then it progresses forward movement to Daniel 7, which is revealed the 5th kingdom. And then it will progress further into Vision 3, Daniel 8, which will give us the 6th kingdom. And it continues to progress forward into Daniel 10, which will reveal the 7th kingdom. So we see a forward progressive movement. Right now, we're just looking at the numbers. So, but I did want to kind of give a brief overview of what these kingdoms were. So I made just a little chart. This was not part of the original PowerPoint. This is my little cheat sheet. So, and we're looking at the remez, the historical structure. And so the first kingdoms in Vision 1 was Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. And we see in these structures too, not to get too far ahead of ourselves, but under the historic prophetic outline, Charlene has noted outline extends to 476. So it began in 606 BC, and I put the timeline here, AD 476. In Vision 2, the 5th kingdom, designated as 4A, is papal supremacy number 1. Is that the best way to describe that, Charlene? You muted. Charlene, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Say your question again. Maybe I didn't hear it.
Is papal supremacy number 1 the best terminology to describe the 5th kingdom? I mean, that's what I saw.
Yeah.
In the book.
Yeah, that's the best. That's what I've used in the book. Yeah, because there's going to be 3 of these, but this is the first one. Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. And so, and then I just put a graphic, a note where that is. It's on page 113 if y'all want to look at it later. And then I saw on page 112, the datable time. Vision 2 extends to AD 1798. So you see that in Vision 2, under the historic prophetic outline, you see the outline extends to AD 1798. So wow, that's a big jump, isn't it? So, I wanted to see how we got to 1798. And it says Vision 2 extends to AD 1798 in datable time because the 1,260-year timeline moves the vision forward in time from AD 538. AD 538 was the end of Babylon. On page 45, you can see those dates listed. So the little horn power was wounded in 1798. So AD 538 plus 1,260 years equals AD 1798. Note, end-time event of Vision 2 ends with the saints receiving the kingdom at the second coming. So papacy number 1 was dethroned by Napoleon in 1798. So if you want to read a little bit more, just a sneak peek, don't get too far ahead, but I got that from page 192. And it's also interesting just to kind of, get the setting. Also on page 302, talking about the Justinian decree and the Waldensians. So that time period is also referred to as the Dark Ages, correct, Charlene?
Yes.
Okay, so many faithful followers of Yahusha lost their lives horrifically during that time period. And then Vision 3 will tell us of the 6th kingdom, 4B. And that's papal supremacy number 2. So we just saw how Napoleon dethroned papacy number 1. And so now we see the establishment of papacy supremacy number 2. And it extends from AD 1801 to present, or present day, and is referred to as King of Fierce Countenance in Daniel 8 on chart page 233. This new papal king works underground with many different secret societies in an effort to destroy Protestantism. So we have seen numerous secret societies exposed. So this is the world we live in. Vision 4 will be the 7th kingdom, represented by 4C, papal supremacy leader of the New World Order. It'll be universal, and that is to be in the future. There's a recap structure chart on page 260. And it's also interesting to read the 3 conquering situations of Rome. Charlene referenced it briefly, but that is on page 329 if you want to read about that. So this is just a little extra, just to kind of get our feet wet, just to kind of have a sneak peek, get us oriented to the time periods here. But mainly what we're focusing on are the kingdoms, the 7 kingdoms, and the sequence of those. Any other thoughts on that, Charlene? Okay.
No, I think that's enough for right now.
Okay, great. And then the 4th pattern that we're going to look at is the time frame movement. So we have 476 AD. It goes forward to 1798. It goes forward, progressive movement, to 1844 to today. And then lastly, the future. Now here again, this is the forward progressive movement. And we also see the times in years that it covers. 1544 plus years, 222 plus years today, and the eve of the end. And what I did was I just copied this little chart again, and I just showed you how she came up with those numbers from 8476 plus 1544 will bring us to the current date of 2020. But it's all just forward progressive movement. 1798 AD plus 222 years brings us to 2020. And then Vision 3 in our present day, and Vision 4, the eve of the end in the future.
Mhm. Does anybody have any questions right here on that one with the time frame? So what is happening is that go ahead, Sharon.
It says, I don't know, Protestant, is that Christians? What is, what's that what is that, Protestants? Because, I mean, I'm not quite sure.
I'm talking about the Protestant Reformation in the Dark Ages. I don't know if everybody knows this history or not, but while Rome was ruling in the, basically from 538 to 1798, this is where there were reformers that were beginning to come forward, slowly at first, but it was called a Protestant Reformation. Are you familiar with that, Sharon? Any of that history, especially?
No, not really. I just wonder if that's like a Lutheran churches or.
Oh, well, yes. Any denomination or church that broke away from papal Rome was part of that Protestant Reformation. Any of them, yes, absolutely. So that's what we're talking about. So there was many of them.
So that was what time period was that? It says today, right?
Oh, you're talking about, we're just giving you a bird's eye view right now, so you can't get all your questions answered until you go through all of chapter 8. And I just want to mention that chapter 8 is about 25% of the book, okay? So basically what's happening in chapter 8 is the timeline that is given there is going to move the prophecies up to a date that is 1844, and that's all going to be explained in chapter 8. But from 1844, what was happening in that time frame under this new kingdom, that kingdom's actually still reigning today. So we're still in this restoration of Yah's truths, right? The Protestant Reformation isn't over. It's still continuing, although there are some in this world that want to make sure it's over. They don't want to work with it, they want to end it. And we're going to be seeing that. So what Daniel 8 is doing, it has moved the kingdoms and the prophecies up to where we are right now today, since 1844. Because the timeline brings you to 1844, but that kingdom is still ruling right now. So until that scepter of power gets passed from kingdom number 6 to kingdom number 7, this is where we are right now in Daniel 8. So it has to get passed from King of Fierce Countenance in chapter 8 to the King of the North in chapter 11. But you'll learn about that, step by step as you go through, okay? I wouldn't worry about that right now. I just want you to see the structure, okay?
Yes, and we still see that ecumenical movement happening today, like Charlene mentioned. Remember how the Pope addressed Kenneth Copeland's congregation and had a representative in his church, and they were rather mocking that there's no further protest anymore. We can all come together. We can all be one. And we've seen the numerous meetings of the mega church pastors meeting with the Pope present day. So they are doing the groundwork today in forming that one world religion. And I believe Maxie, was it Maxie or someone had their hand raised? I don't see it right now.
Yes, I have my hand raised.
Okay.
I'm not real knowledgeable about this, but I had heard that the true Pope is Pope Benedict, and he had violated some law, and so he had to leave the Vatican. He is still the true Pope, but he is not in place. They don't know where he is. And Bernio, which is signing documents in his own name and not in Francis's name, that is now sitting in that position. There is some thought that the Pope's position is falling apart. So just some food for thought as you cross that line into the future.
Okay. Well, thanks, Maxie. Thanks for those insights. Food for thought, like you said. Any other questions on this slide? I think, Momo, you have a question? You may be muted.
No, I don't have a question. I might have pushed it accidentally. Sorry.
Okay, no worries. Okay, so Daniel's structure chart. 3 of Daniel's 4 visions are written using symbolic language. And we're going to go into that in more depth about, and we've talked about it before, symbolic language versus literal language and visions. So we'll look at that later. But 3 of Daniel's 4 visions are written using symbolic language. Well, hold on just a second. I'm just kind of frozen. Oops, that did it way quick. Let me see if I can get it to populate correctly. Let me just go back to this one and see if it will work now. Well, it didn't work, but so the first vision is symbolic. The second vision is symbolic in Daniel 7. The third vision that occurs in Daniel 8 is symbolic, and vision 4 is literal. The fourth vision is written with only literal language, which is very significant. Charlene, would you like to elaborate on that?
Yeah, I will just a little bit because I don't know if I'll be back when you actually do these visions. So the first one was a vision of the image. And of course, they had lots of idols and images, but there was never, ever an image like this that had all these different kinds of metals. They might have had an image of metal, wood, or stone, but this was very, very different. So that's why we're saying it's a symbolic vision. And each of those components represented a special kingdom. In Daniel's second vision, it's a vision of beasts. It's a vision of beasts. And then when you're adding that next Roman component, it's a little horn. It's called a little horn. When you get to Daniel 8, the third vision, it's a vision of horns and a king. It's got all different kinds of horns, and horns represent kingdoms, but it actually names a king of fierce countenance. When you get to the fourth vision, it's a vision of kings of the north and kings of the south. But that's not symbolic. A king of the north and king of the south is just a title. It's a literal title. So you'll see that in vision 2, Daniel 2, vision 2, Daniel 7, you have beasts and a horn. In the third vision, you have horns and a king. And in the fourth vision, you have all kings. So you'll see that. I did try to point it out, but you might miss it. So that's just kind of interesting how he puts all the visions together in a very interesting pattern. They just kind of build on one another. It's just got something fun to see.
Okay, thank you, Charlene. I apologize for my barking dogs. And I had put together this little slide for everyone before when we were talking about symbolic visions and dreams versus literal visions and dreams. It's probably good to review it every once in a while to keep us all on the same page and kind of cement this into our thinking. So look, the first section is not real versus real. Symbolic visions are not real, if you will, like King Nebuchadnezzar's statue. It was a very unusual statue with the gold head and the silver chest and arms and so forth. Literal visions are things that exist, like real trees. And Nebuchadnezzar, when we get into chapter 4, has a dream or vision of a real tree. So that is a literal vision of a real tree. Now, if the tree had been described as a purple tree with a snake crawling up it, with several eyes on it, with fish scales and butterflies on the tree limbs, then that would be a symbolic tree. So we're talking about a literal vision in chapter 4 of Daniel because he sees a literal tree. Yes, Christine?
Isn't the tree symbolic, representing the king?
It does represent the king, but the vision itself is literal since it compares him to a regular tree. And we're going to see that a literal vision does not require interpretation because like Daniel knew what that meant instantly because in Yah's word, other kings and nations had been referred to as a great tree or a big tree.
Thank you.
Okay, so it does represent King Nebuchadnezzar, yes, but what is used is actually something real. So when for interpreters, symbolic visions, example like Nebuchadnezzar's statue, those types of visions and dreams require an interpreter. And that's why Daniel prayed to get the answer to the question what that dream was and what it meant. Literal visions do not require interpretation before application because Daniel already knew what the tree meant. Okay, so those are two examples. I gave you an example of the symbolic and the literal. There are a couple of questions. Go ahead.
I just had a comment, but I'll let the other person who had a question go first.
Okay.
Whoever it was.
Let's see. Let me see. I don't like to hit the deal because it makes my PowerPoint act up. So, oops.
Well, then head and maybe they'll remember what their question is. That was a really good question and Libby gave an excellent answer. And if we get to the next PowerPoint that we have planned for tonight, we're going to actually deal with that in quite a bit of detail. So the difference is between the words interpretation and application. So be watching for that. If we get to the second part tonight, we'll be dealing with that.
Okay, so any other question? Okay.
When you have a symbolic vision, do you have literal and symbolic together, or they're both just separate? Two different. Yeah.
In Daniel's book, that's a good question. I'm surprised to hear that tonight. That's excellent.
Would you
in
repeat
Daniel's book, he does.
Charlene,
Oh, I should.
Repeat the
Yes.
question. Repeat what she shared, Charlene.
I'll let Sharon repeat it.
Okay, thank you,
Um,
Sharon.
When you have a real or not real, symbolic and literal, are they ever intermingling or are they always separate?
Okay.
Yeah, and I'm not sure everybody understands it, but let me explain it this way. In the book of Daniel, in any vision, even the chapter 4, the vision is either completely symbolic or completely literal. He does not mix the two, okay? But guess what? John does. John does some mixing in his visions. There's 8 visions in the book of John, and he does some mixing. He will put symbolic language with literal language. Now, you need to have literal language all the time to carry the thoughts and whatnot. But I'm talking literal, like we're going to talk tonight about this tree, all right? So you want to understand how Daniel puts things together so that when you get into Revelation, you can see the difference between symbolic language and in the literal and how to figure out what to do. So Daniel's going to keep it easy. When you get to Revelation, you're going to be into university just like overnight. But Libby's already done Revelation a couple times, so if she goes through, she'll be able to answer those questions, you know, with your Daniel stuff. Does that help a little bit, Sharon?
Yes, because I do that back and forth a lot in Revelation and in the Old Testament. I pick up Yahusha and things like that. But yeah. So you're saying but you said John, but you meant the book of Revelation, right?
Yes, when I say John, yes. When I say the book of John, we're talking about the prophetic book of Revelation, because the Gospel of John and 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John are not prophecy books. They're you know, one's a gospel and the other is just a book, right? But Revelation is also John's book, and it is a book of prophecy, okay? So if I say the book of John, we're talking about Revelation because that goes along with Daniel, okay?
Right. The John the Revelator. Okay.
Right.
So now we need to look at calculating time and keeping in context of scripture examples. So symbolic vision time calculations. A symbolic day equals a year. So for instance, if we were dealing with the number 1,260 days, that would mean literally 1,260 years, as we saw in Vision 2. Literal vision time calculations are just that. They're literal. A literal day equals 1 day or 24 hours. So if we were working with 1,260 days with a literal vision, it would equate to 1,260 days because it's literal. So all timelines we will see begin and end with voice or legislative decrees. So that's with all timelines. They begin and end with voice or legislative decrees. One can never mix time calculations with just any vision. Symbolic visions require symbolic time calcs, like we just went over above, and literal visions require literal time calculations. So the references to the prophetic keys are on pages 18, 19, and 20. If y'all want to review those pages again, so we'll all be on the same page with that.
Could I just make a comment here right now? It might be a really good time to make this comment. There's a lot of people that when they see a timeline in a prophetic book like Daniel or Revelation, they automatically think that the timeline is always symbolic time because of this rule here, that one symbolic day equals 1 literal year. But you know what? All of it is prophetic time, but not all of it is prophetic symbolic time. If the visions are literal, then it's prophetic literal time. But there's many that make the mistake that just because it's in a book of prophecy, it's automatically prophetic symbolic time. And that's why we're showing what's happening here in chapter 4. The reason that I'm saying this is because when you get to Daniel chapter 12, in verse 7, there is a timeline of 1,260 days. And it does say days, 1,260 days. Because there is a timeline of 1,260 in Daniel chapter 7 that is symbolic and needs to have the conversion 1 day equals 1 year, many just want to say, well, then Daniel 12, in that verse 7, that also has to be 1,260 years, because they just dump everything into the symbolic tank. They're all prophetic. They're all prophetic timelines, but there's a difference between a prophetic symbolic timeline and a prophetic literal timeline. So in order to figure out which one the timeline is, you need to look at the language and the vision. Is the vision given in symbolic terminology or just literal language? Does that help a little bit? We're going to look at that in chapter 4. That might be a little bit confusing right now, but it might be good to just hear that foundation, because we're going to come across it and then they'll be able to, plug it in. Shall we say that?
That does bring up the question that I had earlier, though, on page 20 about Revelations 12:6.
Yes, Charlene, I was going to mention that to you, and we can review that later on, or if you just want to know about it. It was on page 20 under 24B. The year-day computation principle is used only to interpret a symbolic timeline that is contained within a symbolic, historic, prophetic outline. And the examples given were Daniel 7:25, which is correct, but also referenced is Revelation 12:6. So the question was, is that reference to Revelation 12:6 correct?
Oh, I need to get my Bible. Hang on.
Yeah.
Who knows? I could have had a mistake there. Just a second. So you must have gone over that the other week, maybe when I wasn't here.
Right. We did go over timelines and stuff. And Cheryl actually, I didn't pick it up, but Cheryl actually picked it up. And it does seem like that scripture reference may not be in the right place.
Oh, okay. 12:6, it has this kind of language. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she has prepared a place of Yahweh that should feed her there 1,203 score days. So 1,000, we have that, 203 score, that would be 60. So now this is an instance where Revelation has several levels of application. Okay, you can look at this in two different ways. I see this because there's another one in verse 14. Let's read verse 14. We're not going to do a study on Revelation, but just to give you idea. I think it's verse 14. Yes, verse 14. It says, "And to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, into her place, where she is nourished for," listen to this language now, "a time, times, and a half a time." That's very, very close to the language of Daniel 7:25, where he says times, and I think a dividing of time is what it says. It's very, very close. But this timeline in 14 and the timeline in verse 6 They both come out to 1,260. But which one is which? Which one is 1,260 years and which one is 1,260 days? Now, is there anybody here that can tell me in years what a 1,260 day timeline would be? How many years is it?
3.5.
That's right. So that's quite different. 1,260 years is quite different from 3.5 years. I think we have to all agree with that. So basically what John is doing, he's giving you a lot of history here in chapter 12. Just to give you one quick pointer, John has his book divided into 2 parts. Daniel only basically has 1. He has 2, and his book splits between chapters 11 and 12. So chapter 12 is the first chapter of the second half of John's book. That's important to remember. So he's giving you a lot of history and future events in chapter 12. He's just going to zoom through basically 6,000 years of history. This very first timeline in verse 6, when we're doing our forward progressive movement of the events, would be the 1,260-year timeline where the church had to flee into the wilderness for protection from the Roman system that was persecuting so heavily, okay? But when you study Daniel and you get to the 4th vision, you find out that there's another persecution of 1,260 days. That is chapter 12, verse 14, where he is taking you forward very quickly through, because you need to know your history from Daniel 11 to understand Revelation 12. So verse 14 is actually talking about the 3.5-year persecution. That's going to align with Daniel 12:7. That 1,260 is 3.5 years as well. So this is where John mixes things up. Remember I said he mixes symbolic and literal stuff, and this is where you need to figure it out. But if you get your basis with Daniel first and understand what he's doing there, then when you see the language, you're going to go, okay, there's symbolic language. Here's a timeline. I have to do the conversion 1 day for 1 year. But as you see the events moving forward, right to the end of time, and we still have a symbolic woman fleeing into the wilderness. The woman represents a church, okay? But because the context has been moved forward to the end of time, there is no longer any more time for 1,260 years of a prophetic timeline. We're so close to the second coming right now, okay? There is no more time for a 1,260-year timeline to be fulfilled. So that's why we have to learn to take the context, and then we plug in the timelines so we can make sense out of what's going on. Remember, these prophetic books are for the wise to understand, not for the wicked. It's for the wise to understand, okay? These are messages to Yah's people so they can understand where they are in the stream of time, okay? I don't know, does that help, Cheryl, a little bit?
Yes, it does.
Oh, that was excellent, excellent, Charlene, because I never saw that with Revelation 12:6 as being literal, as far as being calculated as 1,260 years, and the second one being 3.5 years. I never saw that before. So very, very good.
Well, maybe while we're here, we'll just show another example because we're so close to it. If you have your Bibles open to Revelation 13, and you saw a picture of that beast on one of the slides already, that 7-headed composite beast that my artist put together just to give you a visual. But definitely in chapter 13, John is seeing some kind of a wicked beast come up out of the sea, and he says he has 7 heads. Now remember, Daniel's going to tell you what each one of those heads represent. He's going to be the one that tells you, okay? He has 10 horns, and he has crowns. He's got all kinds of things, okay? this definitely sounds symbolic. This is not a real beast. You aren't going to find one of these down at the local zoo, right? And he says the beast that he saw was like a leopard, and he had feet like the feet of a bear. It's starting to sound like Daniel 7 when you get into Daniel 7. And he has the mouth of a lion, and there's a dragon. So this is definitely symbolic language. But we know that Revelation is an end time book. Revelation can be made into a historical book, but you won't get the full understanding for the end time events. Revelation, its main purpose is it's an end time book to tell you what the last generation is going to be going through. So as we go through, we see that one of the heads is wounded to death. You're going to learn in chapter 7 of Daniel that wounding took place in 1798. That's where the wounding. So you could take your pencil and you could put in 1798 right there, because there was a wound given in 1798. All right? So that means that John has already taken you through a lot of events right up to 1798, right there. And then he says, and his deadly wound was healed. Guess what? That has not happened yet. We're close, but it hasn't happened yet. So we can't put a date there because it hasn't happened yet. That means that context is now king. Context is king over any of the symbolism or what's ever going on. It's the context that's going to push you forward so you can understand what's happening in these verses. And then it says, his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wandered after this beast. Well, that hasn't happened yet either. We're close, but that hasn't happened. And then it says, and they worshiped the dragon, which gave him power over the beast, and they worshiped the beast, saying, who is like the beast? That hasn't happened yet. And then it says in verse 5, and there was given unto him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemy. Okay, that hasn't happened yet. Now here's a timeline. And power was given unto him to continue 42 months. There's going to be power given to this beast when all this stuff happens, when the wound is healed and everybody's following him, all of those that are not Yah's people, he gets power for 42 months. Now, the question is, we've been hearing about a lot of symbolism, symbolic beasts with horns and crowns and, all kinds of things going on, coming up out of the sea. But this timeline is not a prophetic, symbolic timeline. It's a prophetic, literal timeline because the context has pushed you right into the future, right to the very end of time where this wound is healed. And you'll find in Daniel's fourth vision, that king of the north, that last king of the north, and in Daniel 12, that this is the last 3.5 years. Guess what? 42 months is equal to 3.5 years. This 42 months is going to link with the timeline we saw up in Daniel 12:14, where it said there was a timeline there for she's nourished for a time, a times, and a half a time. Mm-hmm. That's where these two are now. So what John has done is he's taken this little timeline here in verse 14 of chapter 12, and in chapter 13, now he's going to tell you the other side of the story. And he said, okay, we've been talking about the woman that's fleeing in the wilderness. Now I got to tell you about the beast. Okay, so John does mix. He does mix symbolic terminology and symbolic beasts and whatnot with literal timelines. That's why I'm saying Daniel's going to teach you how to figure this out. And when it comes to John, you have to watch the context really carefully. You can't be sloppy about that one little bit. And we've been talking about context in covenant calendar. You know, the context is so important. But in John, you're going to have to be really on your toes if you haven't been before. But that's where it gets fun. But you can understand this if you've understood what Daniel's teaching you in his book, because he's keeping it simple. Does that help everybody?
Yes.
Yes, that was good.
Yes, it does.
Charlene, what do you say to the understanding that many times prophecy has 2 to 3 fulfillments?
Yes, and that's right. It can have. I was actually taught Revelation mostly on a historical, okay, on the historical fulfillments, kind of things that happened in let's say the Dark Ages, okay, that 1260 years. Yes, it can fit because that's the way the Bible is put together on patterns. The patterns repeat. That's how you can understand how to figure these little puzzles out, because Yah has the patterns repeating and repeating. And we all know, we've all heard it said, history repeats itself. Yes, it does. But here's the question, everybody. Do you want to understand Revelation just on a historical aspect, which Daniel has already given to you? Or do you want to understand Revelation in the end time frame for your generation right now, for us living today? Do you think that Yahuwah needed to have 2 prophecy books that tell us about history? Do you think so? I actually think that we're supposed to learn our history with Daniel, the easy way, where it's easy. And those patterns of that history, yes, there's going to be repeat, but the repeats are going to be seen in the end time generation. That's where we're going to recognize the patterns. So if I had been taught to understand Revelation as a completely end time book, basically, the last 3.5 years of Earth's history, that's what you find in Revelation. From Revelation chapter 2 to Revelation 19. Now, Revelation 1 is kind of like a prologue. It's an introduction to the book. And then it starts in with the 7 churches, and you have the 7 seals, and you know all of those 7s, right? But basically from chapter 2 of Revelation all the way to chapter 19, which is your second coming, basically that is just a whole bunch of detail that John is telling you about for the last 3.5 years, basically. Now, I say basically because the 1260 is the most important timeline. We have a 1290 that is 43 months, and then there's the 1335-day timeline as well. So I'm just saying basically 1260 because it's the most important timeline. But basically a very short amount of time. So when you understand that this book of Revelation is just filled with, it is just filled with detail for these last 3.5 years of Earth's history, it becomes a new book to you. It's a brand new book. It has a lot different meaning than putting the book into a historical time frame. Yes, you can do that, and that's okay, but the most important is to move it forward. So I don't know if that helps. I didn't want to get into a Revelation study, and I really, wanted to see the people. Yeah.
No, it was really good.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was really good, Charlene, because I had already taken them into Revelation 13 a little bit last week. So because at the same time, we kind of need to keep everything real and up to date for these unprecedented times that we live in. So no, I really appreciate that.
Okay, so if you can imagine, when I was little, we had this game called tic-tac-toe. Does everybody know what I'm talking about? X's and O's, You just
Yes.
draw X's and O's, and whoever gets 3 X's in a row wins the game, right?
Right.
Everybody knows about that?
Yes.
Did any of you ever see the game, and I don't know what it was called, tic-tac-toe, but it was 4-dimensional, and it had 16 squares on each of the 4 dimensions. Did anybody see that game as younger children?
Yes,
No.
I actually am that today.
Okay.
Where it's the
Okay.
4. You have to get 4
All
in a
right.
row.
This is, yeah. So this is how it works. Daniel is the tic-tac-toe on a piece of paper, 1 level, 9 squares. That's it. Revelation is your 4-dimensional tic-tac-toe with 16 squares on each one, where you can have your tic-tac-toe going diagonally, straight up and down, just on 1 level. It just expands into like multiple applications. Now, what I'd like you to do is just in your mind imagine taking chapters 2 to 11 of Revelation, and they get overlaid on top of chapters 12 to 19. They get overlaid, and they will interact. They're like timelines that slide, and I haven't done the full study on Revelation. I haven't had time. But that's what Revelation is doing. It is not one-dimensional. It's many dimensions, and I don't know how many, but it's many. That's why it seems confusing. But guess what we're learning in Daniel? We're going to learn that he's got every single chapter and verse in perfect order. There's not one chapter out of order. There's not one verse out of order. So the question is, did John do the same thing in Revelation? Does he have anything out of order? And if he does have it out of order, who has the right to figure out what the order is? But you should know the answer, because John has everything in perfect order. If you remember that chapters 1 to 11 is the first part of his book, and chapters 12 to 22 is the second part, and they overlay with each other, and there's things going to be crisscrossing up and down between the two. It's like they have slide rules that are multi-dimensional. That's why I think only the wise can figure it out. And the reason is these prophecies are not meant for the wicked to break these prophecies open, because if they could break them open, I believe that Yah's children wouldn't have a chance. He has protected these prophecies so that only the eyes of the wise will open and see what's going on, so that they're 10 steps ahead of the enemy instead of 10 steps behind.
Excellent.
If you
Excellent,
can,
Charlene.
if you can imagine that.
Totally awesome. You know, that lets us know that we need to go back through Revelation yet one more time, or if not many times, because like we're seeing tonight, how important the structure is, and understanding the structure so it doesn't become a mess like this PowerPoint began with. So that's very, very important for, you know, to have that shown to us. I mean, this is extremely, I'm so glad I recorded this, because it's going to help many, many people. I believe someone has their hand up. I don't see who it is right now, though.
It's me, Libby.
Oh, okay.
It's
Okay.
Vivian. Charlene, where did you want us to put 1798? Where was it?
Oh, 1798 is going to go into Revelation 13, verse 3, where it says, wounded to death. I saw one of his heads. Remember, one of the heads. That's one of the kingdoms. Okay, you're not going to learn this until Daniel chapter 7. But it's one of those 7 heads, and Daniel talks about 7 individual kingdoms. It's where it was wounded to death. That happened in 1798 when Napoleon sent his General Berthier into Rome and took the Pope out of the Vatican. And that was a blow to the Vatican, and the Pope was not ruling anymore. One mistake, though. He took him back to France and he stayed there. He was in exile, I think it was about 17, 18 months before he actually died. While the Pope was still alive, or the way that I understand it, is that they are in power while they're still alive. But that's not what happened back in Rome. You're going to learn all about that in, you know, the prophecies as you go through them. There was another Pope elected that said, we're going to go ahead and we're going to do this anyway. That's where the secret societies and all that came to be in a great big way, and they decided that they're going to move this forward to crush this Protestantism, crush it and get rid of it by working under the table instead of on top of the table. So that's just a very short rendition. That wound happened in 1798. There was a healing up about 1918, 1919. That was where the wound started to heal. It's not healed yet, but we're very, very close. Okay? 1798, right there.
Thank
Very
you.
good. Good question, Vivian. Okay, Sharon?
So that makes me question who's in the Vatican. Like, did that Pope die, and who's in the Vatican? Anyway, yeah, they're gonna throw some little surprise up there, right? There's something I was gonna ask. Oh gosh, I forgot. When you said overlay the 12, 12 over 1 through 11 of Revelation. So if I were to take 12 and I was going to read like one chapter, say it's 2, then I go to 12, go back and forth.
No, that's not the way it works. You have to have a pretty good working knowledge of these chapters in Revelation, and you would have to overlay where the events of one would overlay with the events of another. Okay, so we're not going to go into that tonight, but hopefully when you understand what happens in the book of Daniel and how Daniel put things together, then when you look at the structure of Revelation, because I did give you a structure chart in the back of the book, mind you, it would need to be tweaked, okay? It's basically correct. I would have to tweak it up, and I haven't had a chance to revise Daniel, but basically that structure in the back of Daniel book is basically what you're going to use for Revelation. So if you look at it, you'll see where the 144,000, you see Daniel doesn't talk about the 144,000 in those words, but John does. And he talks about the 144,000 6 different times in those visions, number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. So you would have to start overlaying and lining up with the 144,000 and different things like that. It's a puzzle. It's like a Rubik's Cube, you know, mixing up a Rubik's Cube and getting it right. It's a really big puzzle.
Very good, Charlene.
I wouldn't expect you to do it right, you know, this week.
Yes, but you're motivating us to, after we go through Daniel, to go through Revelation again. I have all the time in the world for Revelation, so I cannot get enough of it. And you need to go through it numerous times, because that's when you just make these discoveries. Correct?
Mm-hmm.
Every time you get something new.
That's right. That's right. Okay. All right. So that was some great insights, Charlene. Thank you for that. And let me see if my PowerPoint will progress. It's just frozen now. Here we go. So back to the PowerPoint. It says Daniel's book has 2 sections. Part 1, dreams and visions. 4 visions are linked to God's people, Yahweh's people. And that's Daniel 2, Daniel 7, Daniel 8, and Daniel 10, 11, and 12. So any additional comments on this slide, Charlene?
Yes, so basically, Daniel chapter 4, which is a vision, has nothing to do with Yah's people. It just has to do with King Nebuchadnezzar, okay? So that's why I'm showing that here, that chapter 4 is a vision, but it's not on this Daniel structure chart because chapter 4 has nothing to do with Yah's people. It was just between King Nebuchadnezzar and Daniel. That was it, okay? There could be applications to the end of time, but we're not doing that application. Remember, we're sticking to just what we're doing in my book. We're not,
Right.
yeah, we're not doing another level.
Right. Sometimes I sneak in a few things, but but basically we're sticking to the historical. Okay. So, and on this chart, it says there are no timelines addressed on this chart. Okay.
And now, what yes, I did not address, there's no timelines addressed on the chart, but I do show you where the outlines move the time forward, but I have not addressed timelines, really.
Right,
So,
right. And I did make a note at the bottom, Daniel chapter 4 vision is not addressed on this chart because it focuses mainly on King Nebuchadnezzar, but it does follow the same structure, which you discovered later on after you had published your book. And so, and that is, I have the page number covered up, but in that PDF I sent out to everyone, this structure chart is in that PDF. So the note above, and I'm just going to read like the first sentence here, is this is the only vision in Daniel that has the same prophetic timeline mentioned more than once. So the timeline in the heavenly scene, it's mentioned Daniel 4:16. Check our time, we're doing okay. Let his heart be changed from man's, let him be given the heart of a beast, and 7 times pass over him. So it's mentioned once there in the heavenly scene. And after the interlude question, you see in the application interpretation, it's listed in Daniel 4:22 or 4:23, sorry. And let it be wet with the dew of the heavens, and let the ocean be with the beast of the field till 7 times pass over him. And then you see under answer to the question, prophetic timeline number 3 comes from Daniel 4:25. And again, and 7 times pass over him. And then lastly, we see it mentioned in verse 32, you are given grass to eat like oxen, and 7 seasons shall pass over you. So in the prophetic key number 26, and in the comparison to the right of the heavenly scene, Charlene elaborates that this is a literal vision, like we've already shared, and it's using a metaphor, which answers, I think, Christine's question of what type of symbolism was that. That was a metaphor. I guess that would have been a better way to answer Christine's question earlier. So since it's literal, the 7 prophetic years equals 7 literal years. And the same way with the application interpretation, again, it's 7 literal years, as well as the 3rd and 4th time it's mentioned, they're all literal years. There's no mixing of symbolic time calculations with literal time calculations. So all timelines, prophetic key number 26, all timelines in prophecy begin and end with voices, legislative or judicial decrees. So this 7-year timeline begins with the speaking voice of Yahweh in Daniel 4, verse 31. The kingdom is departed from thee. That's what the voice of Yahweh comes to Nebuchadnezzar and says. And then there's 7 years of time where King Nebuchadnezzar experiences insanity, and it ends with the speaking voice of the king himself, Nebuchadnezzar, in verse 34. I, Nebuchadnezzar, bless the Most High and praise and honor him that liveth forever. So the bottom note here is all prophetic timelines in Daniel 7, 8, 9, and 12 will have speaking voices or decrees to begin and end the timelines. This principle also applies to the prophetic timelines in Revelation by number 1, a fulfilled prophecy, number 2, a speaking voice, which is, and number 3, a decree. Any other thing we need to mention here?
So, yeah, so we're going to go over this in a lot of detail. For those of you that have this PDF, do print this page out, because obviously you know it's not in the Daniel book. This is part of the revision, but we're going to go through it in a lot of detail in 3 full PowerPoints for Daniel 4. But I just want you to think for a minute. If the heavenly scene is symbolic, if you feel that that tree is symbolic, then someone give me the answer to this question. What happens to the timeline that's there in Daniel 4:16, which is given during the heavenly scene? What kind of a timeline is it if the tree is symbolic? Is it a prophetic symbolic timeline or a prophetic literal timeline?
Is it prophetic
Symbolic.
literal?
I heard both. I heard both answers. One is right. If this is a symbolic vision, okay, the heavenly scene, I heard literal. Okay, we're going to say that this is a literal vision. So that timeline is a literal timeline.
Right.
Now let's reverse it. If the vision is a symbolic timeline, then that if that vision is symbolic, pardon me, then that timeline has to be prophetic symbolic time.
Right.
That means that 1 day equals 1 year. Now, you might have to get your calculators out for this. How long would 7 years be in literal time? If 1 day is equal to 1 year, 7 years would be how many? 7 years of symbolic time is how many years of literal time? Anybody?
Is it days that you want?
I want literal time. You can give it to me in days or you can give it to me in years.
2,555 days.
Then you have to do, I think it's 2,000, what is it?
2,520.
Yeah, 2,520.
Yeah.
Okay, is it 2,520 literal days or 2,520 literal years? Which one is it?
Days? No. Years.
Yep.
Yes.
You see what happens is that when you get down to the application, which is the interpretation of what the heavenly scene is telling you. If the heavenly scene is symbolic and it says 7 years, then the timeline in the application, in that third component there, you would have to then understand it, what the literal time is, and the literal time would be 2,520 years. Now, I want you to do some more math. Let's just say that this vision is in 606 BC, or I don't know, say 600. Say 600 BC. Add on 2,520 years. What do you get?
5820?
5820?
Yeah, we
No.
said, okay. Say the numbers again.
Let's just say we're starting out at 600 BC. Let's just use 600 BC because Daniel was there already 6 years. I'm just using that as a date, okay? So if you have 600 BC and you add 2,520, what would be the date?
1920.
I have
1920.
1925.
Yeah, approximately
1920.
19, 20, 25. Okay, that is just a prime example of what happens when you do not pay attention to how these timelines work. If that is a symbolic vision, then that timeline has to be symbolic time. And that means King Nebuchadnezzar would have been in the field till 1920, 100 years ago. And he's not.
Very good.
Now,
very good.
That is too good. That's too good.
That's too good. That's right. Now, that's the reason. That is the kind of twist, everybody. Those are the kinds of twists that a lot of people are prophecy teachers. I don't care who they are. The pastors and the PhDs in my own denomination. That is the twist that they are doing with the timelines in Daniel 12, only opposite. They are taking the proper application for the Daniel 12 timelines to leave them in the future where they belong and twisting them to make them to be in the past because they have not paid attention to the language of Daniel chapter 11, which is the fourth vision. It's completely literal. Remember what I said to you. Daniel does not mix his visions with some symbolic language and some literal. He doesn't mix them. Revelation does, but Daniel doesn't. He keeps it clean and he keeps it simple so that you know what to do. Do you remember when I was here maybe one of the first times with you and I said, when I started working on Daniel, and it was January the 4th of 2004. And I knew about the Daniel 12 timelines and I knew the application, but I learned it from Marion Barry a different way. And the way that I learned it from her, I could not put it into this book because I had some guidelines of what I would do and what I would not do. And I sat down and thinking, what am I going to do with the Daniel 12 timelines? I was working on chapter 1, Daniel 1, and Yahweh said to me, this is what you do, Charlene. You do every verse and chapter in its order. You don't take anything out of order. And I know who you are. I know you're going to want to go to Daniel chapter 7 because you like all those beasts. I know what you want to do. But I want you to start in chapter 1, go to chapter 2, and then chapter 3. And I got the message. And I said, well, that doesn't help me out very much. And Yah said to me, Charlene, you do everything in order. And when you get to chapter 12, you're going to have the answer. And that was one time I listened. Because guess what? That's where the answer is. When you do chapter 1, 2, and 3 in order, and then you get to chapter 4 with these timelines, this is where the answers are, right here in this chapter. How many pastors and preachers and PhDs that have studied prophecy for 60 or how many every years, I have not heard of one of them that understand chapter 4. If they don't understand Daniel chapter 4, they are going to mess with timelines in Daniel 12 and most of them in Revelation, and there's a lot of timelines in Revelation. And guess what, everybody? You won't know the difference. You won't know. Because it sounds good. What they're telling you sounds good. I was raised on that. It sounded good, but it was so wrong because they didn't understand chapter 4. When we discovered this, it was like, oh my goodness. Okay, you might think, why is all this emphasis being done on chapter 4 with the king getting cut down as a tree? that might be a smokescreen, because Yah has hidden a lot of secrets in this chapter. So that's why we're going to spend a lot of time here. The reason being is that timelines are fun, and they tell us what's going on, and they tell us where we are in the stream of time. If we don't understand timelines, we're lost in prophecy. We're going to be lost. They tell us where we are. That's why you want to know how to work with them. And they are fun. They are lots of fun. So that's why this chapter is so important. So Libby, I know we're at 2 hours now, and we may not get to the second part that we planned tonight. So maybe it's a good thing.
No, absolutely, it was a good thing. And as you shared with everyone, this is in your PDF, the updated Chapter 4 PDF that I emailed out to everyone. So read through that entire note, because that's going to reinforce what Charlene just reviewed. And as we go along, we're just going to get better and better as we get all of this straight in our heads. So that is the end to the presentation. And I think it was perfect.